there's a strategy and a posture involved with commercial real estate. And the reality is most healthcare practices don't follow the strategy. They're doing things that are the antithesis of what the top companies in the world do. The doctor's doing it, the office administrator or manager's doing it, and consequently, they're losing literally hundreds of thousands of dollars per deal. No savvy tenant would ever ask a landlord, send me a proposal. And yet, how many doctors have called their landlord, or the landlord stops by and says, your lease is expiring in 6 months. Can I send you a proposal? Like, you never do that.
Welcome to the Physician Growth Accelerator, a show where we break down your private medical practice systems into vitals, give you the tools to diagnose root cause of what may be restricting your growth, and prescribe what to do about it. I'm your host, Ed Williamson, and I believe that everything you experience in business and personal life is the perfect outcome of your current systems. So if you don't like the outcome, then we have to tweak the system. And I want to ask you a question. If you are doing something right now that was perfectly designed to lose you hundreds of thousands of dollars, but you don't know it, would you change? I'm guessing the answer is yes. And that's why we're speaking with our guest today, Colin Carr. He's the founder of Carr Healthcare Realty. They have over 5,000 clients across the United States just in healthcare. Colin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Zed. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I'm a big fan. So the reason this show exists, the reason the Physician Growth Accelerator exists is I believe that private practice is important. And what that means to me is that we are here to help people build moats around their business. As a practicing physician that owns a business, it's very hard to keep your eye on everything. You know, your focus is patient treatment, patient care, and there's certain things that are just done because they are the way they are done. And when I talked to you, it really struck me that there is an opportunity, not an opportunity, there is a current loss that practices are feeling potentially because they're not doing something the right way. And it sounds like you may have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a right and a wrong way to approach every real estate transaction. A residential transaction is approached very differently than commercial real estate. An example, in residential, you go look at houses with an agent or you look online, and when you find a property you like, you submit an offer in a contract form. And if the seller says, yes, you're under contract, you're locked and loaded, there's opportunities to get out of that contract, but you're under a contract. That's a legally binding document. In commercial real estate, we look at what do the top companies in the world do? Like, what do Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies do? They go to market, they look at all their options, they narrow down to the top three or four, and then they will negotiate with three or four landlords or sellers simultaneously in a non-binding format, not a contract, but a letter of intent, non-binding. And they'll go three or four rounds of negotiations with three or four landlords because they're not going to wonder if they got the best terms possible. They're not going to wonder if they should have looked at other properties. They're not going to wonder what they could have achieved if they pressed harder in a couple different areas. And so, there's a strategy and a posture involved with commercial real estate. And the reality is most healthcare practices don't follow the strategy. They're doing things that are the antithesis of what the top companies in the world do. The doctor's doing it, the office administrator or manager's doing it, and consequently they're losing literally hundreds of thousands of dollars per deal. And here's the reality, as you mentioned, if they knew they were losing a couple $100,000 a deal, they wouldn't do it. They don't know that's available. They don't know what's possible. And so we can talk a lot about that. But the bottom line is most healthcare providers, if they're doing real estate themselves, which the vast do, and they don't have a detailed strategy, which the vast majority do not, the average doctor is losing a couple 100,000, and that's on a small deal. That's like on like maybe an 1,800, 2,000 foot space. If you're in 3, 4, 5,000 square feet or more, it's very possible you're losing five, six, $700,000 on every deal. And again, you don't even know what's happening.
Yeah. And I want to be really specific so the audience understands who we're talking about. This can be a single provider practice that leases space. So we're talking about you. It could be a multi-provider, multi-location practice that leases space. It could also, what about maybe you have multiple spaces because there's surgery centers, whatever it is, but there's no one who falls outside of this. That's what I want the audience to understand, because sometimes if we speak in the term of real estate transaction, their brain is going to go straight to, I'm investing in real estate. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the operation of your practice and the actual physical space that you use to treat patients. Am I off base with that kind of summation?
No, that's great. That's right on. And this is pertaining to whether you're a startup, whether you're an existing practice. If you lease your office space, which well over 90% of every healthcare office is leased from a third party landlord, that's on the table. And even if you're buying, there's still a couple $100,000 in play in most deals too. It's higher in lease transactions because there's more variables. There's the lease rate, the annual increases, the free rent package, build out allowances, build out periods. There's all these economic terms that are present in a lease negotiation that are not in a purchase. But even in a purchase, there's still a lot of money on the line. And I think a lot of doctors just take people at their word. So a landlord will tell them, well, we don't do that, or we can't go this low, or we can't do that because of our internal policies, and they'll make these like unilateral, like, just completely arbitrary statements of what they can or can't do, or what they never do. And the doctors just kind of buy it. They just say, oh, well, I tried, and I got an answer of a no, or I asked for this, I didn't get it, but they gave me a little bit. And so these doctors or office managers just assume like that they're doing good enough, and that, you know, it's kind of like, I want to go buy a Ford F-150 truck, and yeah, maybe I can get a little bit off at this dealer, but there's an MSRP and everyone kind of pays the same thing. And that's just not the case. Like we've had deals where we have a medical office building and there's 15 doctors in that building, and we've worked on, let's say, 4 or 5 deals in that building, and we see a doctor we didn't work with versus a doctor we did work with. And it's not uncommon for there to be again, a 300, 400, $500,000 difference, not just lease rates, but again, concessions, free rent packages, building allowances, et cetera. And so nobody wants to sign a 10-year lease and realize they lost $400,000, and there's no way to undo it. It's not like you're golfing with some friends and you just pull out another ball and hit them all again. Like, no one's really keeping track, or you can take back the purchase to the store and get your money back, or buy it when it goes on sale. Like, you sign a 10-year lease, that landlord's not giving you back any money that you could have obtained if you negotiated. Like, you're stuck in that lease.
So, I want to imagine that there's people listening right now, and maybe we floated up a little pain that they didn't understand, right? We found a little wound, we're pouring a little lemon juice into it, which can be healthy, right? We want some awareness around the things for us to have healthy businesses. And within that, there could be people who right now think, well, I guess I'm just screwed. And what I want to make sure is that they understand what trigger points for them to think about as they move forward. And I'm going to use your buying the Ford F-150 example. If you go to a car dealership and there's something about you or something about your process that makes you the favorite potential customer of a car dealer salesperson, that's probably not good. You don't want to be the favorite person of a salesperson. And right now, there's a scenario where this group of people who is leasing space for their medical practices, they are the favorite people of the landlord, and that can't be good. Can you walk the audience through what kind of trigger points they should be thinking about in regards to reaching out to an organization like yours?
Yeah, that's a great point. So let me drive it home by giving you the difference between two types of tenants. If a landlord has Starbucks in their retail center, they know when that lease comes up, Starbucks has an internal team of real estate professionals, and they always hire an expert on the outside, and the two are consulting. And prior to that agent calling the landlord saying, let's talk about a lease renewal, they go to market, even on lease renewals. And they'll look at offers from 3 or 4 or 5 different landlords, and they'll go 3 or 4 rounds of negotiations. And when they go to that current landlord on a lease renewal, they're not wondering what they could get if they moved across the street. They're not wondering how competitive the market is. They're not wondering what's market for lease rate, what's market for bill and allowance, what's market for free rent. Like, they have all of the information. And so they don't ask the landlord, they don't say things like, send me a proposal. Like, if you ever call your landlord and say, send me a proposal, I'm trying to say this respectfully, but you might as well just say, here's a blank check, you fill in the blank. Like, you fill it in, landlord. no savvy tenant would ever ask a landlord, send me a proposal. And yet, how many doctors have called their landlord, or the landlord stops by and says, your lease is expiring in 6 months. Can I send you a proposal? Like, you never do that if you're savvy. What you say is, my agent is going to call you. The agent calls and says, landlord, prior to you reaching out or whatever it might be, we've already been to market. We know what market is. We know what other landlords will do for us if we move. We know what it looks like if we want to purchase our own real estate. We've done a purchase versus lease analysis. Here are the terms we're willing to accept if we're going to consider staying. And here's how much build out allowance we want. Here's how much free rent. And it's all predicated not just upon asking for some random number. It's factual. It's not emotional. It's not some whim like, hey, would you do this? On some random scenario. It's this is what we know we can get. And sure, you're going to probably push harder because you're going to see what they'll say, but it's going to be based upon the market. And if you don't have that information, then you have no clue what you're doing. So when a landlord sees a doctor who does a lease every 7 or 10 years calling them, or an office manager, that landlord or listing broker instantly thinks we're going to get a premium. There's no way this person knows the market. There's no way they're savvy enough to understand what's going on. They don't play the game. And so we're going to be accommodating. We're going to be respectful, but we're going to make an extra $300,000-400,000 in this deal. And this is our dream tenant. Like, this is the person that shows up with an open check in the blank, and they let you fill in the blank. Like, that's what's going to happen eventually once this deal goes down, if it goes down. That's not what they're thinking. When it's Starbucks, they think we better come with the best terms possible, or they're going to move across the street. If it's Chipotle, if it's a bank, if it's an office user, it could be Lockheed Martin or it could be Charles Schwab. Like, pick your large national Fortune 500 company. That landlord knows, if I don't come with legitimate terms, I will lose this tenant, and I'm going to have to spend 2 to 3 times as much money to release the space than if they stay. That landlord does not want to lose a tenant. No landlord wants to have a space go vacant and have it sit vacant for 12, 18, 24 months and then spend even more money to make the next deal. Especially in healthcare, like, the healthcare provider actually has a more unique position than like a large, like, Fortune 500 company or a large retailer. They actually have more leverage and more strength if they knew how to use it. A doctor doesn't want like a veterinarian to leave that space. They don't want a physician to leave the space. Like, that's a unique space to that person's use or build out. They don't want a new tenant. They want the tenant that's paid them rent every month the last 10 years to stay. And so the landlord is in a more vulnerable position than the tenant is, and yet they don't know it's even they don't even know what's going on.
Yeah. I think it's a good point. And typically the other side gets played, right? The physician who has a lease renewal coming up, they're thinking to themselves, I hope they don't raise the lease that much because I really don't want to have to move.
Yep.
And then the landlord understands that. So they know they can nudge it up, and there's a gap in which they can nudge it where you might get a little pushback, but they're probably just going to take the path of least resistance and stay in the space. Where what you're saying is go on the offensive in the sense of understand your data, understand what the true market is, and remove all of that leverage that that landlord believes they have and put it on your side of the table. And whether in your mind you want to move or not, that doesn't matter. Use the information.
Yep.
And when you learn what potentially is out there, you might actually find out, you know what? We can move to a better place. And even with the cost of moving, it's better for us.
Yeah.
Um, I love that.
Let me give a couple of stats on that. So, 1 out of 3 healthcare providers that tell you initially, I don't want to move, once they go to market, they will end up buying a building or moving once they see what's out there. And so, like, right off the bat, we can expect around 33 to 35% of the people that say I don't want to move. Like, the answer is you are actually going to be moving because you're going to choose to move. No one's going to force you. You're going to want to move because the terms are going to be so much better, or you're going to end up buying a building or get a larger space, whatever it might be. The other 2/3, they might end up staying still, but they're going to get terms that are so much more superior to what they would have received if they go through that process. So prior to me starting Carr, we only do healthcare and we only do tenant and buyer rep. So we have no conflicts of interest. We're never on the landlord side. It's only the doctor side. But prior to this happening 17 years ago, I was predominantly a landlord agent, and I worked for some of the largest landlords in the country. I worked for the largest medical REIT in the world. I had a lot of very large medical landlords. They would ask these questions. They would ask me when I would go meet with a doctor who had a lease coming up for renewal. They'd say, Colin, have you met with Dr. So and so? I'd say yes. They would then say, does he have a broker? And if my first answer is no, that changed the entire conversation. If I
Wow.
said they have no representation, the landlord instantly is thinking to themselves, and I'm saying this fairly bluntly, I'm not trying to be abrasive, but the landlord would think to themselves, what an idiot. Like this is a multi-million dollar transaction or $1 million transaction, and this person's going into it alone. Like again, if the IRS audited you, the last thing you're going to do is call them back directly. Your CPA is making that phone call, like your tax attorney. If somebody were to threaten you with a malpractice lawsuit, the last thing in the world you're going to do is pick up the phone and start having a conversation with the prosecuting attorney. Like you're not going to do that. Like you're going to lawyer up or go to your insurance company. So landlords would ask the question, Colin, does Dr. So and so have a broker? No. The next question is, what other properties has he or she looked at, and what numbers did they share with you, or what do they know about the market? Nothing. And then the next question is, did they say something like, I don't want to move, or this is a great location, or I don't have time to move or money to move? And in the vast majority of conversations I'd have with a doctor, I would ask them, and they unfortunately would be foolish enough to tell me, yes, I don't want to move, or no, I can't move. Once the landlord hears any of those questions answered in their favor, they're not going to give you anything they don't have to
Yep.
give you.
Are you a private practice leader dealing with team drama, growth headaches, or just trying to keep your head above water? Introducing the Physician Growth Accelerator membership, a free resource for our podcast listeners like you to get real solutions. Inside, you'll find exclusive materials, free courses, bonus podcast content, and live events, all designed to help your practice grow. It's free for now, so don't wait. Visit physiciangrowthaccelerator.com and click members to join today.
I always like to give an analogy here because it helps wake people up. If you were selling your residential house and your house was worth $1 million, okay? Now you might have only bought it for 500,000, but the market's gone up, it's crazy, and so you might have bought it for 500,000, it's worth a million. You're not going to sell it for 800,000 if you can get a million. Like it's not about you being a good person or a bad person, you taking advantage of somebody. If your residential listing agent says, "Hey Zed, like I know you bought your house for 500,000, it's probably only worth 7 or 800,000, but I think I could sell it for a million." You're going to say, "Sell it for a million." And when someone shows up and if they get into a bidding war and someone offers to pay 1,050,000 for it or 1.1 million, you're not going to say, "Hey, listen, I would
Yeah, don't pay
actually
that much.
take 800,000. Like, don't pay me 1.1." You're literally going to say, if this guy's willing to pay me 1.1 million, get the deal done. And that's how landlords are. Landlords see doctors show up with no agent, no posture, don't know the market. They're out of time in a lot of scenarios. They're thinking to themselves, the lease rate's really only $28 a square foot. But if this guy's willing to pay me $34 a square foot, and he wants to give me an extra $400,000 over the next 10 years, I'll take that check. And they'll do that deal and they won't think twice about it. And they'll think to themselves, it's his fault for not getting an agent. It's his or
Yep.
her fault for not going to market. It's his or her fault for being willing to sign a ridiculous lease that nobody else would have signed if they were paying attention. But they must be so successful and make so much money, they don't care. Oh, they're a doctor. Landlords just think if you're a doctor, you make a ton of money. So
Yep.
they
That's
don't
true.
care. So that
There's
type of a reality just has to set in for the doctors. Like there's a lot on the line, and you can't play games with this transaction.
I want you to kind of pull the curtains back on some math you're doing in your head, referring to the transaction as a multi-million dollar transaction. I think that that's important to clarify for the audience because they might be thinking about, well, no, my rent is like 8,000 a month,
Mhm.
right? So when you call it a multi-million dollar transaction, what is the math that's happening in your head?
So we're gonna start with the lease rate, and we're gonna take that 8,000 a month, so $96,000 a year, and then we're gonna multiply that times 10 years, and we're gonna get up to
There you go. So
w- w-
I want that to be clear because
yeah.
this is another thing our brain will do. It'll play tricks on us and go, Well, is it really a big difference between 8,000 and 6,500?
Yeah,
And when it is. Well, if you take that, $1,500 times 120 months,
yeah,
um, we're talking about a big deal, and it's straight to the bottom line money.
yep,
So 10 years from now, if you're okay just taking 200 grand and lighting it on fire, then keep doing what you're doing. But
yeah.
if the idea of that doesn't sound too great, then this might be the path to go.
Yeah,
Um,
well, also it's exponential too in a couple of formats. Number one, you've got an annual increase built into 99.9% of every lease has an annual increase. So if you're getting 3% or 4% and you should have only been paying 2%, like again, take a 3% annual increase, you'd have nine increases in a 10-year lease because you have it starting in year two. So 4% versus three or three versus two, you're going to get tens of thousands of dollars. If you're increasing 4% on 8,000 versus 2 on 6,500, that adds up. But the other thing too is once you get to that end of the lease term, most people don't realize this. Most leases, the annual increases outpace the market. And so it's customary to have a 3% annual increase or whatever it might be, but most real estate doesn't increase by that much every year. So you get to the end of a 10-year lease and you might be 10, 15, 20% above market for where you should have been. And so if you start at $28 a square foot and you end at, let's say, 34 a square foot, but you should have ended at 32, you've now got an even greater delta to get back to a market lease rate. And it's going to be more challenging for you to do that. So it's not just, where you start, it's where you finish. And then where do you finish compared to where you should have finished? And then that plays into the next negotiation. And so you get a doctor that signs a 10-year lease that wasn't represented properly, that didn't get good terms, and then they come up on that first lease renewal. You've got to get another couple dollars a square foot just to get back to where you should have been, let alone to where you should be for the current market. So, you take that concept, and then another one, every large national retailer, Fortune 500 company is getting free rent. If you're going to give a landlord a 5, 7, or 10-year deal, you're going to get free rent in exchange if you're a savvy company. So are you going to get 1 month of free rent or are you going to get 5 months of free rent? Well, again, 8,000 a month. If you get one versus five, you just lost another $40,000.
yeah.
If you don't get the right building allowance, you're either going to have a space that lacks the finishes it should have, it's not as competitive aesthetically, or it's worn down, or you're going to come out of your own pocket or borrow money and then pay 7% interest over the next 10 years to renovate your space when you should have got that money from the landlord in exchange for a long lease. So like we just did a lease renewal, for a 5,000 square foot plastic surgeon, and it was only a 5-year deal. We got $180,000 to renovate that space. All new flooring, all new paint, all new hard surfaces, the reception desk fully redone, upgraded LED lights, roll down mesh blinds, nicer accoutrements, nicer ceiling tiles. The entire aesthetics of that space just transformed, and that doctor didn't spend $1. And then you take on top of that, you get a 5-month free rent package to sign a 5-year lease. And on 5,000 square feet, all of a sudden you have an extra $80,000, $90,000 that are in your pocket as the owner that you didn't pay to the landlord. So here's an $80,000 or $90,000 bonus to sign a new 5-year lease. Here's a brand new space, and then your lease rate went down on top of it. That's how you get to where it's a couple $100,000, and that's where people. We're not talking about saving $30 a month on your cable bill, or hey, I
Right.
wonder if I signed up for this new promotion at Verizon, I'd get a new cell phone. Like we're not talking about 20 bucks or 30. We're talking about, money that adds up to tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars.
That's great. Well, Colin, I really appreciate you taking the time and spending it with us today. It's an eye-opening topic, and I know it means a lot to the audience. If anybody has questions or curious to chat with you, they can visit carr.us. So that's CARR.us. And we'll put that link directly in the show notes for easy access for those of you that are driving. You don't need to write it down. But once they get there, Colin, what would be like your number one suggestion on here's what to do next?
Yeah, so I would say just start a conversation with one of our local agents. Like you can go to find an agent in the nav bar, upper right-hand corner on the website, and then just go to your state, go to your city, find an agent, and then start a conversation with them. Reach out, whether you have a lease coming up in 12 months and it's time to start actually negotiating and touring, or whether you are 6 months into a 10-year lease, Start a conversation. Let someone look at your lease. How did you do on your last lease? Where do you currently stand compared to the market? And then you can set a game plan for moving forward. Again, whether it's 12 months from now or tomorrow or 9 years, at least you have a benchmark or a basis for where you are compared to where you should be. And then you might have a desire to look at options to purchase. There's things that take more time. If you're going to buy a piece of land and build from the ground up, that will take you 2 years, believe it or not. So you can't wait till your lease is 6 months from expiring and then try to go to market. You've run out of time. So getting someone that you like and that you trust, that's going to be a trusted advisor, whether you're moving forward now or years from now, that's a great next step. And then also, if you are the type of person that doesn't need to be like the expert in there, but you would like additional information just so that you feel more comfortable, we have a plethora of information. So you can go under our resources tab, FAQs, glossary, articles, videos. Again, you don't have to become the expert or master, but if you want to get some additional information to where you at least understand what some of these terms mean, or how to do things at a higher level, we've got more information than you probably could spend time getting to. And it's educational. It's not salesy. It's truly like, this is what you need to know, and it'll make you a more complete expert in the area of real estate so that you can handle your next transaction with the goal of getting much better results.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that that you put that out for the audience to have access to. And with that, visit the website, learn, be better, build that moat around your practice so that you are always in the driver's seat. And thanks, Colin. We'll see you next time on the Physician Growth Accelerator.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate it.